Today we're diving deep into one of the most iconic and essential progressions in all of jazz, rhythm changes. This form has it all: bebop vocabulary, fast-moving 2-5-1s, dominant cycles, and tons of room for creativity. But it can feel a bit like a maze when you're just starting out. So to make this journey easier, I've created a free Rhythm Changes mini ebook, including the complete PDF of the etude that we're going to be referencing throughout the video. You can download it right now using the link below and follow along as we unpack the ideas inside. This etude includes both traditional bebop vocabulary and colorful modern substitutions. But before we jump in, two quick invitations. First, the Next Level Sax community. If you're hungry for more, our members get weekly vocabulary PDFs and monthly full etudes. There's instant access to all of my books, live interactive masterclasses with iconic saxophonists, and a supportive sax nerd-friendly community that's with you every step of the way. Check it out. I've put the link in the description below. Also, I want to let you know that my one-on-one studio is open again, and if you're ready for personalized feedback, the kind of single tweak that can unlock months of progress, there's a 50% off your first lesson in the description below. All right, let's demystify rhythm changes and level up together. All right, a couple of things that I want to preface this lesson with is that I'll primarily be using jazz articulation, meaning I'm going to be tonguing and emphasizing the upbeats. Most of these lines are eighth notes, so it really lends itself to that, especially because we're in the bebop style and bebop concept. The other thing I want to let you know is where I'm coming from when it comes to the chord changes. Now, the first time through the form, it's a 32-bar form, I stick primarily to the more traditional chord changes. So I utilize the traditional 5-chord dominant chord sequence on the bridge this time. I also utilize the dominant 6 chord in the A section. So the 1-6-2-5 in the opening measures is a dominant 6 chord. Now the original chord changes, it was a minor chord, which is more diatonic to the key, but oftentimes in a jazz context, we're going to turn that into a dominant chord, especially when we're looking at such players and ideas coming from Sonny Stitt's Eternal Triangle, or maybe Oleo from Sonny Rollins or Coltrane, which is primarily the vocabulary we're going to be drawing from. Now, the second chorus of this rhythm changes etude and examples is going to utilize some chord substitutions. Now, I went back and forth whether or not I should put the actual chord substitutions in the backing track so that we actually hear the harmony changing, but then I thought, well, what's more practical? If you go on a jam session and you play rhythm changes, you call rhythm changes, it's more often than not that the soloist is going to put in substitutions regardless of what the rhythm section is doing because you haven't discussed it. So as a means of being more practical, I decided to keep the chord changes in the backing track similar throughout all of the A sections, even though I'm going to put in some substitutions. Now on the B section or the bridge of the second chorus, I'm going to utilize the Eternal Triangle Sonny Stitt changes because it is a very common chord progression that's utilized all the time, even in a jam session type of context. Okay, I've gone ahead and broken down the two choruses of the rhythm changes etude that we've got here into 9 specific phrases. Now, some of those phrases are 4 bars long and some of those phrases are 8 bars long. There's not really a real rhyme or reason other than that maybe there's more information in a phrase that's only 4 bars long than there is on some of the 8-bar phrases. I also went ahead and tried to be as detailed as possible in 2 ways. One way in where I'm kind of drawing inspiration from. Now, me personally, I've transcribed quite a bit of Sonny Stitt, Coltrane, and various other saxophone players, including Brecker, Walt Weiskopf, some Eric Alexander, and I tried to remember where I might have got some of this vocabulary and reference that in part of your ebook. So there's a separate section in your ebook that actually highlights where the vocabulary is probably coming from. So for example, this certain phrase might be from Sonny Stitt, or this phrase might be more drawn from Coltrane. I tried to mark and remember as much as I could throughout, and that is on that separate sheet. Now, separate from that is where the actual melodic and harmonic analysis occurs. So that's where I talk about when I'm using the bebop scale or triad pairs, or when I'm using neighbor tones or other various types of concepts. I also decided to label all of the chord substitutions on that same sheet. So let's go ahead and get started with phrase number 1. All right, with phrase number 1, let's start where the inspiration comes from. You'll notice in the first part of that phrase, it's really inspired by a lot of the Sonny Stitt ideas, and more specifically from that Eternal Triangle solo. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely deep dive into that solo. It is a wealth of knowledge. And then as we move further into the phrase, you'll see that we're really drawing upon more of the Coltrane influences. Let's go ahead and play through this nice and slowly. Let's go just that far. Now, I already see a couple of things that I really want to hit. All right, let's check out actually where we're going to land in measure 4. Now, we land on the 3rd of the minor chord, and if we back up one measure, my note choices are really what I call a harmonic anticipation. So it's really drawing upon the harmonic minor scale of that minor chord that I'm going to land on. In this case, for the B-flat instruments, it's the D minor 7 or C minor concert. So I'm going to take that D harmonic minor scale, and I'm going to preface the landing point on that minor chord utilizing those notes. And I chose those notes because the C sharp, in the case of D harmonic minor, the leading tone, is the 3rd of our 5 chord A7. And the F natural of our harmonic minor scale, or the 3rd of D harmonic minor, is the flat 13 of the A7. Now, because the harmonic rhythm is moving pretty quickly, it's really easy for me to get away with some of the more tension-filled notes. For example, the F natural on an E minor chord for the B-flat instruments could be coming from the diatonic system of C major, or it coming from the D harmonic minor, the 3rd. Now, this is a really important key concept, because if I understand that if I can tonicize the 5-to-1 relationship, I can really go back and forth between those two chords and really convey the harmonic idea of that minor chord. So for example, if I just think about D harmonic minor and think about, okay, A7 going to D minor, I'm going to have a really strong 5-to-1 relationship. It might sound like this. I'm simply thinking A7, D minor. And if you want to get even more into that, check out some of my other videos where I break that down and give you a couple more ideas. That is really where I'm coming from on that 3rd measure going to the 4th measure. Let's check out just those 2 measures. Notice the B flat that's part of my D harmonic minor is the flat 9 over A7. Let's back it up one measure and check out the triad that I'm using on the 5 chord, which is G7 for the B-flat instruments. I'm using that E-flat augmented triad, and I utilize this throughout. It's really the augmented triad built off of the flat 13, in this case E-flat. Now, of course, an augmented triad has 3 different roots. It could be E-flat augmented, G augmented, or B augmented. I choose to think of E-flat augmented just because that's where the triad's starting in this case, and also I like to think of how can a altered extension become part of my melodic development or note choices. Let's check out just that measure. Notice I resolve that tension right down the scale, 3-2-1, if we're thinking about G major, resolving to the 3rd of the minor chord, E minor, which would be the G. Now, again, I got this really from or inspired by Coltrane. Let's keep going with another Coltrane inspiration, which is that digital pattern in measure 4, the 1-2-3-5, which I utilize throughout this etude. It's a really great way to simply communicate the harmony. Let's check it out. It doesn't get more obvious than that as far as what we're communicating. It's the 2-5-1. Let's check out phrase number 2. Now here in phrase number 2, I'm really utilizing tritone substitutions and sequences. Now for my sequence, I decided to use arpeggiation. Now remember, here's a key concept. When you go outside of the key or you imply or play substitutions, it's a really great idea to really stick to the real core of what that harmony is that you're implying. So chord tones. So I simply just go up the arpeggios. I go from a minor arpeggio to a dominant arpeggio and another minor arpeggio to a dominant arpeggio. That way it's really accessible and it's really clear that what I'm doing is intentional, even though I'm stepping outside of the key from what the rhythm section is playing, and I'm utilizing a lot of the chord extensions and alterations. I want to make it accessible. If I start getting in there with some sort of chromaticism, it could be really cool. And again, you can play whatever you want as long as you know how to convincingly resolve it, but it could also sound very haphazard and unorganized. Let's look at just that measure. Again, I'm just going from minor to dominant. Notice that we're descending chromatically by half step because that is what the tritone substitution lets us do with our root movement in the bass. And if you want to get deeper into the tritone substitutions, check out that video that's in the description below about the tritone substitutions. I go into lots of different vocabulary ideas, how to utilize it in different contexts, and of course, what is this tritone substitution and why is it important to be able to use it? All right, before we go any further in phrase number 2, let's just check out where some of the inspiration comes from. You'll notice that the very beginning of that phrase is really inspired by Sonny Stitt's Eternal Triangle solo. It's directly really lifted off of there. I spent a lot of time with that solo and I love that idea. Let's look at it. Then I get into those tritone substitutions that we've looked at, and that's really coming from Coltrane. I believe it's a solo on Oleo that he utilizes this type of vocabulary, and he really likes to use that augmented triad off of the flat 13 that we talked about before. And phrase number 2 ends with a very Coltrane-inspired lick. Let's look at it. You hear him play that all the time. I really like how it's got a kind of a finality to it. All right, let's back it up and let's look at more of the melodic and harmonic considerations. If we take a look at measure 13, which is part of phrase number 2 again, we've got the bebop scale. Now remember, the bebop scale in its dominant form has both the natural 7 and the flat 7. So it's essentially an 8-note scale, and what's great about that bebop scale is it allows us to put chord tones on downbeats if we're staying to stepwise motion in 8th notes. So my 1, 3, 5 and flat 7 will be on downbeats if I start my line on a downbeat on a chord tone, and anytime I change direction with that line, if I change direction on a chord tone, I will still end up with downbeats being chord tones. And if you really want to dive deep into the bebop scale, check out the link of the video in the description below. I go through how to utilize the bebop scale, what it is. We really go through a lot of different contexts, and I really break down how it's important as a connector device. The bebop scale I love to use when I'm going from one idea to the next. It's not the most melodic, but it's a great connector material that really conveys the harmony. So check out that video. Let's look at measure 13 where I'm utilizing that bebop scale. It's just simply our C bebop scale for the B flat instruments. It's got my B natural and my B flat. Now I continue along, and again, I utilize that flat 13, E flat augmented triad. Let's look at that next measure. Right into my 1, 2, 3, 5 pattern, that Coltrane thing. All right, let's go ahead and check out phrase number 3. Now remember, for the bridge on the first chorus of this Rhythm Changes etude, I'm utilizing the most simplified version of the bridge, so it's just the dominant chords that are moving by fourths. Now I'm not even utilizing the 2 chord that precedes the 5. It's straight up just the 5 chord. This gives you a lot of freedom. Let's check out where some of the influences are in this phrase. I start right out with a real Coltrane-inspired kind of cliche phrase that I never get tired of. Let's look at it. You often hear that same type of phrase utilized with triplets, and in this case I just simply went with the eighth notes because I'm gonna really be bringing that tempo up. Then I continue with a phrase that I really like, that I believe I got kind of inspired from an Eric Alexander solo that I was checking out a while back. I'm utilizing kind of this pentatonic scale that really lends itself to a melodic shape. Let's look at it. That last phrase really gives us a real period on that melodic statement. Now let's get into the melodic and harmonic considerations. Now, if we look at that opening statement on the bridge, it's really a B minor chord that's over the E7 chord. It's B, D, F sharp, and that gives us our 7, our 9, and our 5. Let's look at it. And now the Coltrane aspect, which is kind of this double neighbor, meaning that I'm approaching my target note, in this case the 3rd G sharp, from above and below. So I go first above on the A, and then to the G natural and into the G sharp. And then again, I kind of put a period on the end of that phrase with this Eric Alexander kind of inspired minor pentatonic from the 5th. So it's an A7 for the B flat instruments, but I'm utilizing really this E minor pentatonic. However, it doesn't have the D natural or the flat 7, but that's really what I'm thinking about, that shape of the E minor pentatonic. You could also think of it as a G major pentatonic, but again, it doesn't have that D natural. Let's look at it. All right, let's keep moving. Let's check out phrase number 4, which is the second half of the first chorus of our bridge. Now here, let's look at the inspiration. It's really kind of coming from that Sonny Stitt solo from what I can best remember, and it's basically just a bebop scale. We're on our D7 for the B flat instruments. I'm gonna use that dominant bebop scale again that has the natural 7 and the flat 7, so I'm gonna have that C sharp and the C natural. Let's look at it. And then I'm just kind of using this lower neighbor or chromatic note, the B flat, into the 3rd of the G7. If I were to just simply play the D bebop scale from top to bottom, I'd have. Notice that I'm really emphasizing those upbeats and I'm sticking to that jazz articulation. I'm going to be tonguing the upbeats and breath accenting. Now here's kind of a key concept that I just want to mention is that the slower the tempo, the more we have to contrast our downbeats and our upbeats to create the swing. Now I play with straight eighth notes pretty much all the time. Now what I just played was straight eighth notes, but it sounds like it swings because I'm creating a huge contrast between my downbeats and my upbeats. My downbeats are not as emphasized as my upbeats, and I utilize the breath accent to make that happen. It's not that I'm tonguing harder, it's my breath accent. And again, if you really want to get into that articulation stuff, check out that other video in the description below. Let's continue on with the rest of phrase number 4, where I'm utilizing what I like to call a pedal point. Now, pedal point is really kind of a classical term, but it really does describe what's happening. I'm utilizing the G natural there as sort of my return, and then the second voice, I like to call it, the voice that's moving is ascending chromatically from the third to the fourth to the sharp four to the fifth. So B, C, C sharp, and D. That's kind of creating this back and forth and kind of two voice idea. Let's look at it. And then I simply go right into the bebop scale again, this time the G dominant bebop scale. Really common. Let's hear that all put together. So this is phrase 4, nice and slow. Again, that was all straight eighth notes, but it swings because of those accents. Let's keep going and let's check out phrase number 5. So for phrase number 5, really the inspiration is just a diatonic sequence. Now, diatonic means within the key, and technically we're in the key of B flat major for this song, right? But the chords are changing and they're conveying notes outside of the B flat major tonality. So when I mean diatonic, I mean within the relative diatonic land of that chord. So when I get to the A7 for the B flat instruments, I'm going to put a C sharp because that is diatonic to A7. Let's look at it real slowly. So the sequence I'm utilizing is comprised of both leaps and stepwise. And notice that the stepwise motion, or the second half of the sequence, is really where the resolution occurs. I'm really clearly outlining the harmony and then descending stepwise to the resolution. Now, again, I really want to make sure that I'm making it accessible through the repetition. That's the beauty of the sequence. So remember, the sequence is super powerful for when you want to stay inside of the key and make it really accessible, as well as when you go outside of the key and keep it grounded in something that makes it accessible. Remember when we did the tritone substitution? I made a sequence out of that so that even though I was going outside of the key, it was still accessible. Now here's that diatonic example, and it's going to make it accessible and melodic even though I'm staying within the chord tones of each chord. Let's keep going. Now within that fourth measure, I utilize that digital pattern once more. Let's look at it. Again, I love to use that digital pattern because it really conveys the harmony convincingly. You'll also notice there's an A flat over that G7, which is our flat 9, and then the 7 resolves to third. So the F natural goes down to the third E. Now, voice leading is a huge topic, but it's really simple in the concept itself. Really, I want to go from one chord to the next, utilizing notes that travel the least amount of distance possible. So I want to use primarily whole steps and half steps that convey the harmony. So I'm primarily going to stick to those chord tones. And this is a great example. You see it all throughout here, and that's what really allows us to convey that harmony in a convincing way. If we keep going, we check out measure 29 and phrase number 5 here, and it's actually an example where I'm actually just using a passing tone. Now, most of the passing tones that we've kind of come across so far are part of a bebop scale, and this is actually not part of the traditional bebop scale. Let's look at it. Notice that I actually kind of start that phrase with this kind of bebop, blues, Thelonious Monk type of thing. It just comes right to mind, and that's probably where that comes from. Let's keep going, and let's look at phrase number 6. All right, with phrase number 6, now the fun really starts to begin. This is where I kind of depart from our traditional vocabulary and our traditional chord changes, and I start to utilize substitutions, altered pentatonics, tritone substitutions once again, and triad pairs. Let's get into it. All right, with phrase number 6, let's really look at where the inspiration is coming from, and it's really coming from the Coltrane substitutions. I utilize that minor third from our first chord, which would be our C major to E flat 7, and then I start to do the fourths movement, A flat 7 to D flat 7. Now, you'll also notice, which I've noted here, that they actually come from the tritone substitutions of all of those. So actually that first 4 measures is just a string of tritone substitutions once again, except it's starting even earlier and utilizing dominant chords over not traditionally dominant harmony. So for example, that D minor chord, which is the second bar of our phrase, it would traditionally be D minor there. I'm actually utilizing the A flat 7, a tritone away, which is really a departure and a lot of tension-filled notes there. But because I'm utilizing arpeggiation and really convincingly communicating the altered notes or the substitution, A flat 7, it comes across as convincing. Let's look at it real slowly. Notice, before we back up, notice that I really resolved it nicely to the 5th of the chord, which is the G over the C7. Or if we're looking at it as a G minor 7, it's just the root. Let's back it up and look at our first part of our substitutions there. Once again, I'm going from C minor to E flat 7, and then that E flat 7 is sort of resolving as the 5 chord to A flat 7, and A flat 7 is sort of resolving as the 5 chord to D flat 7. And again, I'm utilizing those triads. Notice that half-step voice leading A flat to G, which is the 3rd of our E minor chord. And now I'm into my straight-up tritone substitution land. I can't emphasize enough that you want to really communicate the substitution harmony as clearly as possible. I'm using digital patterns, I'm using triads, I'm using lots of chord tones. Let's keep going. So if we look at the second half of phrase number 6, I'm drawing upon, again, the harmonic anticipation type of concept, where I'm targeting the minor chord, or D minor once again, but I'm utilizing the D harmonic minor over the 2-5 that precedes it. Let's look at it. It's basically the same exact vocabulary. Right into our digital pattern, 1, 2, 3, 5. And here, I'm utilizing a bit of that E flat augmented once again. It starts out kind of that way, but it's really just drawing upon the altered scale over that G7, which, remember, the altered scale is basically the 7th mode of melodic minor. So if I play my melodic minor, which is like a major scale with the flatted 3rd, but I start on the 7th scale degree of that melodic minor, it's going to give me my flat 9, my sharp 9, my sharp 11 or flat 5, and my flat 13. Let's look at just that last measure of that phrase. Again, I'm resolving by half step from the flat 9, A flat, to the 5th of the C, which is G. Check out my online community, Next Level Sax, where as a member, you get access to an exclusive variety of information, including videos, weekly PDFs, mini lesson videos, monthly jazz etudes, access to all of my books, digital courses, masterclasses, personalized feedback, and of course, a supportive community where you can ask specific questions. Just click the link below to go next level. All right, in phrase number 7, I really wanted to highlight and feature a different kind of concept or melodic approach, which is triad pairs. Now, traditionally, triad pairs work really well when they're a whole step apart, meaning I might have on a C7, I might utilize the C major triad, gives me all those chord tones, and the B flat major triad, which gives me my flat 7, B flat, my 9, D, and the 4th or the 11th. Now, traditionally, we want to stick kind of to whole steps away or maybe half steps away because we're trying not to repeat any of the notes. If I pick certain triads and certain relationships, I might have repeated notes, and therefore I'm not getting the most out of that melodic device. We want basically 6 different notes, and it's pretty safe if I'm a whole step away relative to the 2 triads that I'm going to have mostly different notes. Also, we can mix the chord qualities, but again, be careful that when you're mixing chord qualities, for example, a major triad and a minor triad, or a minor triad and an augmented triad, that you're trying to kind of stay away from any repeated notes, because that is not going to kind of give you as much flexibility and convey that shape as convincingly. Let's look at the beginning of phrase number 7 real slowly. I start right out really simple with the C major arpeggio or triad, and then I go to the A major arpeggio, really right within our harmony, and then the D minor arpeggio right within the harmony. Now, I tried to pick triads that are a whole step apart, but it really is a challenge when the harmonic rhythm is really quick. When we've got 2 beats per chord, it becomes a real challenge to try and get a whole step apart type of triad pairs, but I was able to do that for the most part. Let's look at it one more time. Now I start to get into triad pairs that are a whole step apart. Let's look at the next part. I've got a G major triad over the E minor, and then I've got a whole step away, the A major triad, which is over the A7. So G major and A major, whole step apart. Now, the G major triad is really going to highlight the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7 over that E minor. And of course, the A major triad is going to highlight those chord tones. Now look at the next measure again, I'm a whole step apart. I've got an F major triad, which is over my D minor, which gives me the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7, and then I've got my E flat augmented triad over my G7, which gives me the flat 13, the B natural is my 3rd, and then of course the root. Now I continue to get that relationship of whole step apart. Let's keep going. I've got a B flat major triad over my G minor, and then I've got an A flat augmented triad over my C7. Now that's going to give me my flat 13, my 3rd, and what else? Well, the root. All right, so over that F7, I'm utilizing an A diminished triad. Now that F7 could be an F minor 7. And when I listen to Sonny Stitt play and analyze a lot of his lines, he's really gravitating towards sort of that A flat, which could come from the B flat 7, again for B flat instruments, or the B flat bebop scale, which would sound like this. You could also really just think of it as an F minor 7 chord and pretty much get away with it because the A flat is really the sharp 9 over an F7. But what I've got there is I'm going to stick right to that harmony, which we find in like Olio and some of the other rhythm changes types of contexts. I'm going to stick to that F7, which has got that A natural, and I'm going to utilize the diminished triad. Let's look at the triad pairs utilized in the last measure of this phrase and how it leads into our Sonny Stitt eternal triangle bridge chord change substitutions. Now, a lot of this vocabulary really comes from one of my biggest influences, which is Walt Weiskopf. I studied with Walt at the Eastman School of Music, and he is a master of not only Coltrane vocabulary and harmony, but also triad pairs. And we did tons and tons of exercises around the triad pairs. And one of those exercises is utilizing half-step approaches. So if you look at that last measure of the phrase leading into the bridge, that's exactly what it is. It's half-step approaches to those triads. So I've got a half-step approach, G sharp to my A into my F major triad, and then a half-step approach, the A sharp into B of my E minor triad. And then I go right into the bridge of our Sonny Stitt eternal triangle changes, which is going to be a C sharp minor 7 for the B flat instruments, and I utilize another triad pair. Really, it's just a triad off the C sharp minor, really conveying the harmony because, again, if I'm going to step outside of the key, I want to alert that rhythm section that, hey, there's something different happening here, potentially. Now, you could say that those chord tones are really the same or share the same kind of chord tones for the most part as our E7. The G sharp is the 3rd, the C sharp is the 13 or the 6, and the E, of course, is the root. Let's keep going. I've got a couple more triad pairs, and now we are into phrase number 8. Okay, in phrase number 8, again, I am kind of continuing with that concept of triad pairs in the beginning of the phrase, which I got from Walt Weiskopf. Also, Gary Campbell is another great person to look at for that. Now, Coltrane, of course, well before all of these guys was utilizing those triad pairs, and if you really check out a lot of his live recordings, like Live at the Half Note, you can really hear how he's investigating and exploring all of those triads. Let's keep going with this phrase. Let's check out that second measure real slowly. I'm simply going down the F sharp major triad. Now we're on an F sharp 7, and then I'm utilizing the E major triad, which is a major triad built off the flat 7, which is a great formula for dominant chord triad pairs. One built off of the root and one built off of our flat 7. So if I had a C7, for example, I could do that C major triad and I could do the B flat major triad. Let's keep going. I want to make a real strong statement and period on the end of this first 4 measures of our bridge, and so I'm really utilizing a bit of some really common shapes like pentatonics and really trying to emphasize the fact that I'm in C minor here. Check it out. It doesn't get more obvious than that. Look at the F7. And then I keep going, and I'm going to utilize another triad. Let's look at that B minor 7. Not only am I utilizing a major triad to communicate the B minor tonality, which in this case is going to be a D major triad, this 4 measures is really a descending chromatic sequence. And to make sure that it's very obvious to all involved that I know that that is happening, I'm going to play a sequence myself. And this is a really common approach when you get to these fast-moving descending chromatic 2/5s. Let's look at that last 4 measures of the bridge real slowly. Okay, so I'm basically alternating between the sequence part and some sort of response. So I've got kind of this call and response between the sequence itself. So I've got my first sequence idea, and if we utilize and just really focus on just the sequence aspect, it's going to be this. So as a response, I'm utilizing that Coltrane idea that we saw in the first part of the bridge on the first chorus, and this time I'm actually utilizing that triplet. Let's listen to it. Notice again, I'm using that double neighbor. I've got the upper neighbor, the A flat, and the lower neighbor, the F natural, until I hit my third, my target note, which is G. That is kind of my response. So if I put together those first two measures, and then I go right into the next part of my sequence, and here I sum it all up with this response that leads me into the final A section. Notice that I'm utilizing the tritone substitution, the D flat 7, and I'm going from the third F to E, the third of the major chord. Let's hear that last 4 bars one more time, real slowly. All right, let's check out phrase number 9 where it gets really wild. All right, here we get into altered pentatonics. Now, I tried to pick a pentatonic or an altered pentatonic that I could actually utilize over the entirety of that first 4 measures of the final A section. Now, remember, an altered pentatonic is basically a pentatonic scale, which is any 5-note scale. It doesn't have to be a certain formula. Any 5 notes is technically a pentatonic scale, and to make it an altered pentatonic scale, we're basically just going to change 1 or more notes from a more traditional pentatonic scale. So, for example, a major pentatonic scale might be 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, but if I alter one of those notes, I make it an altered pentatonic scale. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, if I make it 1, 2, 3, 5, flat 6, or flat 13, I've got an altered pentatonic. So if it was C major pentatonic, my notes would be this. And if I alter that by flatting the 6, I get this. Again, it's a pentatonic scale, but I've altered one of those notes. The 6th becomes a flat 6, and that's exactly what I do over the first 4 measures of the final A section. Let's look at those first 4 measures really slowly. But before we do, the inspiration really comes from Jerry Bergonzi, one of my favorite players of all time. He is so creative, and he has such a vast knowledge of harmonic concepts. And one thing that he loves to do that I found is the altered pentatonics. He will play any and every note imaginable and make it work because it's all about the resolution. Let's look at those 4 measures. Here's just my altered pentatonic. Now, what's really important to note here is that even though I'm using an altered pentatonic and I've got some notes outside of the chord, I'm actually landing on primarily chord tones on the downbeat when the chord is changing. So if we look at what the notes are that land on mostly the downbeats when the chord changes, they're mostly chord tones. I've got thirds, sevenths, and fifths. Let's keep going. So for the last 4 measures of this example, I'm utilizing 2 different altered pentatonics. Let's look at the first altered pentatonic. It's really kind of similar to a minor pentatonic. I mostly label these on what pentatonic does it most closely relate. So for this altered pentatonic, it's most closely related to the minor pentatonic. Now, a minor pentatonic is 1 flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, which sounds like this. Now, in this case, I'm actually lowering that 5th scale degree from a C natural to a B natural, which gives me this really cool half step from B flat to B. I love it when I've got a shape that's got leaps as well as steps, especially thirds and half steps. So if I alter the pentatonic by lowering that 5th, I've got the B natural and it sounds like this. It sounds really blues influenced. Let's look at just what the notes are in that measure. And then I go to my next altered pentatonic. So here I would say it most relates to the major pentatonic, but here I've got a raised fifth and I've got my regular seventh. So a regular major pentatonic is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And starting on E flat, it would sound like this. But if I put in that sharp 5 and I change the 6 to the 7th, I get this altered pentatonic. You could also start this pentatonic off of the G and call it something relative to a dominant pentatonic with a flat 13. Let's look at the measure and what the notes are in the actual measure. Again, I've got that stepwise motion coupled with the leaps. It's a really cool shape. Now let's look at those two measures put together. Now I bring it back home by communicating that C major harmony, but what I do is actually utilize sort of this 5-to-1 relationship. I utilize the arpeggio from my G7 to really draw us back into C major. So if we put together those last couple measures, all right, that's a ton of material, so here's how I'd recommend that you practice how to integrate the ideas and the concepts into your own playing, because let's face it, that is the goal. It is not to just regurgitate the material, it's to actually assimilate it and get it into your own playing as quickly as possible. So first, pick one lick or one idea or one section and loop it over and over and over. Then put the backing track on with those chords. Maybe it's just one chord. I like to take one chord and take a concept like triad pairs and just explore it for an hour until I really get that sound and those ideas into my playing. And then I start to put it and apply it into a certain context. Now, if you'd like to take your playing to the next level and you'd like to go deeper and get personalized feedback, I've opened up my private lesson studio, and right now I'm offering 50% off your first lesson. So that link is in the description below, and don't forget to download your free Rhythm Changes ebook with the complete etude, and feel free to drop a comment below if you have any questions and share your progress. I'll see you in the next one. Happy practicing.